Luxury cars, nightclubs, and fine dining? The wealth of Russia's Far East region has been concentrated here. Sitting 9,300 kilometers from Moscow, Vladivostok is the furthest nerve ending of Russian rule. But against all odds, this remote city has thrived following the invasion of Ukraine. In the vast expanse of East Russia, Vladivostok is the only developed town. Here, Moscow is a distant memory. Across 7 time zones, the Kremlin's influence is spread thin. What is fueling this boom? How did the war accelerate its wealth? Today, we're diving into the distorted boom of Vladivostok. Vladivostok is not a mega city. Its population is about 600,000, roughly comparable to Milwaukee. But in Russia's Far East, Vladivostok is truly the only city which suffers traffic jams. Over the past 5 years, several large shopping malls have been built. New bridges have gone up, and the cost of living has steadily increased. Especially after the war, Vladivostok has seemed to become even more vibrant than before. We know that Russia is geographically vast, but the majority of its population lives in the far west region. So how does Vladivostok connect with the economic core more than 9,000 kilometers away? Actually, very little. For goods to cross those 9,000 kilometers, they must spend more than 12 days rattling along the aging Trans-Siberian Railway, driving logistics costs sharply high. Distance doesn't just impact the economy, it erodes administrative control. Unlike the Soviet Union, modern Russia is loosely organized. With the central government struggling to project power so far from Moscow, Vladivostok has a high degree of local autonomy. Take the simplest example: cars. Russia is a right-hand traffic country just like the US. Drivers sit on the left, what we call left-hand drive. Naturally, you'd expect Vladivostok to follow this rule, right? But look at the streets here. At least 80% of the vehicles are right-hand drive. This city operates under a traffic reality unique in all of Russia. Right-hand drive cars on the right side of the road? So where do these cars come from? The answer is smuggling from Japan. Vladivostok is too far from Europe and so close to Japan. Cars imported from Europe simply can't compete with cheap smuggled Japanese ones. Over time, the local government began to turn a blind eye, and for Moscow, thousands of miles away, also chose to look the other way. The smuggled Japanese cars are just the tip of the iceberg of Vladivostok's unique prosperity. Along with those cars, the East Asian lifestyle has flowed into the city. Supermarkets here are packed with Asian goods. Locals have long been accustomed to Chinese soy sauce and Korean choco pies. In Russian restaurants across Vladivostok, you'll even see kimchi served alongside traditional borscht. This brings us to the first reason for the city's boom: a commodity economy far more developed than that of the Russian heartland, coupled with less restrictions. After all, when you are positioned in the middle of East Asia's commercial powerhouses, as long as you can plug into this economic cycle, things are bound to thrive. Beyond geography, we can also find another answer in economics, specifically the Siphon Effect. It's a somewhat counterintuitive phenomenon. In an impoverished region, if a relatively prosperous town exists, it will drain an outsized share of population and resources from the surrounding areas. This, in turn, leaves the poor regions even more destitute. It is clearly the reality of the Russian Far East today. Surrounded by vast stretches of wasteland and settlements with crumbling infrastructure, Vladivostok stands out as the only decent city, making it the last pleasant resort for residents across the Far East. By absorbing this influx of cheap labor, Vladivostok's service industry has flourished. Yet facing the power of capital, these ordinary laborers have zero bargaining power. They burn out their prime years, becoming nothing more than a tiny, insignificant drop in the city's ocean of prosperity. Furthermore, the massive spending from Asian tourists has made the city even wealthier, which in turn lures even more Russian young people to come and toil. Following the outbreak of the war, Vladivostok's prosperity even skyrocketed. Fearing for the security of their assets, many Russian rich families from the western regions began snapping up real estate here. Those upper middle class followed suit, relocating to this corner of the empire to escape the shadow of the conflict. These new arrivals brought huge amount of money to the town, and this tidal wave of capital has skyrocketed local prices. Since 2022, the cost of dining in hotels in Vladivostok has doubled, while the streets have become a runway for luxury cars. For the ultra-rich, the war is nothing more than earning money in another way. Beyond the wealthy elites from Moscow and St. Petersburg, Vladivostok draws wealth from another source. One far darker, more brutal, yet undeniably real: the death benefits paid to the families of fallen soldiers. In the crushing poverty of the Russian Far East, the financial rewards of military service are so attractive. The vast majority of those fighting on the front lines in Ukraine are men from impoverished regions like the Far East and the Caucasus. The grimmer the mission, the higher the bounty. Consequently, the higher the poverty, the higher the casualty rate. In parts of the Far East, the death toll has exceeded 0.5% of the total population. Here, almost everyone has a family member or a friend who has perished on the battlefield. Reports on the exact amount of these blood money payouts vary, but they often reach into the millions or even tens of millions of rubles. For a destitute family, this is quite a lot. Enough to leave their villages, move to Vladivostok, and start a new life. Having lost their primary breadwinners, these families can no longer survive in rural towns built on hard manual labor. Moving to a town like Vladivostok becomes their only desperate choice. And then, these grieving families become the newest contributors to the city's hollow prosperity. By now, the roots of Vladivostok's distorted boom have become painfully clear. This prosperity is not just deformed, it is inherently cruel. In reality, the economic growth of any city in this world deserves rigorous scrutiny. At the very least, we must ask, what is the true cost of this prosperity? In the Russian Far East, for every new neon sign that flickers to life in Vladivostok, there is a family somewhere in the hinterlands falling into ruin, or worse, consumed by tragedy.